Yesterday, the United Conservative Party released the results of its leadership review, and Premier Jason Kenney got 51.4% approval from the party members. Consequently, he resigned. I'm going to talk to Duane Bratt, who's a professor of political science at the Mount Royal University, about that. So, welcome to the interview, Duane.
Hey, Markham, how are you doing?
Just fine, thank you. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. Let's start with just your general take on yesterday's announcement.
So let's start with the number. In the days, I would say week, 10 days leading up to the vote being announced, the Kenney people were extremely confident. They were talking 60%, which is in normal circumstances, a disastrous leadership review. But they spun it that in this circumstance, 60 was quite positive. And they were doing some of their own internal polling, but I think it was damaged goods. Like they were saying, we're calling from Calgary Lougheed, Kenney's riding, who was answering the phone types of things. So I think they believed they were going to get 60, and I think they were shocked at 51.4. We now know that there was significant delay in the announcing of the result yesterday. And the reason for that was discussion about the result and negotiations with Kenney and how Kenney was going to respond. And we don't know if it was the party apparatus saying, this isn't good enough, you have to step down, or whether it was Kenney saying he needed to step down and resistance was coming. We don't know the nature of that discussion yet, but we do know that that was the cause of the delay. So then we go to Kenney's statement, and he's in a very friendly room. They're all friends, political allies of him. And I was shocked by the number, just because that was like the number of ultimate chaos. If it had been 48, then he's leaving. If it had been 58 or 60, he's probably still going through it. 51.4, I thought he's set the bar at 50. He's going to fight through this. Then the speech begins, and it sounded like he was going to fight through it. He mentioned, I'm going to accept this democratic result. Everybody else should accept that democratic result, which had been his trademark slogans. And then there's a pause, and then he says, now I intend to resign. And I just gasped. And people in the room, I mean, there were people crying and gasping as well. Like it just seemed to come out of the blue. And it shouldn't. Someone who gets 51% should not be a surprise that they're stepping down. But the nature of the whole review process, I mean, the margin of victory was less than 1,000 votes.
Well, let's talk about what happens now. So he resigned. Now, everybody assumed that he would no longer be premier, but that's not the case.
That's not the case. He is very good at phrasing things. And so the moment he said that, I'm starting to think, I go, no, he's talking about intent to resign when a replacement is there. I think he wants to remain as premier and leader of the party until that occurs. And I ended up having a really good discussion on CTV News Channel with Thomas Mulcair and Laurie Turnbull from Dalhousie University about that, because there's precedents. Ralph Klein stepped down when he lost a leadership review, but he remained as premier until a replacement was chosen months later. Ed Stelmach did the same thing. On the other hand, Alison Redford left immediately. So he's opened that door. And I think that's what the caucus meeting, one of the items that they're going to talk about today is, does Kenney stay as leader, or do we bring in a caretaker? And that will show, I think, if he still has support in caucus. There's a lot of people in caucus who didn't attack him publicly, but they also didn't really defend him. So now that he's announced his resignation, are the knives internally going to come out and say, no, you're going to leave now? We'll have to see. It's too early to tell. They're meeting as we're doing this interview.
Now, there's going to be a leadership race coming up, and Brian Jean is mentioned as one of the favorites. Danielle Smith, I think just a few minutes ago, held a press conference where I believe she announced that she's going to be throwing her hat in the ring. How's that going to play out?
I mean, Brian Jean is considered the favorite, because he was the first one to announce, and he led the anti-Kenney forces. But I think you're going to see a lot more people, particularly out of cabinet. You're going to see probably Travis Taves, the finance minister out of Grand Prairie. You're going to probably see Doug Schweitzer, the economic recovery and jobs minister out of Calgary, coming forward, and they represent different factions of the party. There are people, will there be people outside the current party? I mean, the days of airlifting in Jim Prentice or Brian Jean or Jason Kenney from federal politics, so does Michelle Rempel Garner, does a Rona Ambrose come in? We'll have to see. And are there people we're not even thinking of? So I think it's early. There are people who have probably been considering this, but they were not going to go public unless Kenney stepped down. And I think this party is still in trouble. It's not a united party. It was barely united when it formed. And the only reason it formed was opposition to Rachel Notley and the NDP, because there were huge internal divisions: rural, urban, moderate, pragmatic, ideological, social conservatives, fiscal conservatives, and they united to remove the NDP. Once they did that, then all of those divisions came out again, particularly under COVID. I think those same forces came together to remove Jason Kenney. But once Kenney's gone, a leadership race will bring all of those internal tensions back. And I don't know how this party stays together.
So what happens? There's going to be a leadership race. When have there been an announcement by the party when that is going to take place?
No, they haven't. My expectation is you're probably going to see a result maybe in September, October. I mean, it's May now. You've got the summer. There's no immediate urgency. It's not like when the Ontario PCs had to do it because there was an election only a couple months away. So I think you're probably looking at the fall. I think you're still looking at a May 2023 election. I mean, never rule anything out in Alberta politics, but if I'm a brand new leader who's just won a leadership race, I want to establish a track record before I go to the people. So that's how I see that process playing itself out. But the party executive hasn't set up what the rules are, the timeline, how much money is the entry fee, none of that. I mean, we don't even know if there'll be an interim leader.
What are the odds, Duane, that there are MLAs who leave the UCP caucus? Maybe there's the formation of another party or parties even from some of these splinter groups. What's your take on that?
Oh, I think that's definitely going to occur. Will it occur now? I don't think so. But could it occur in the aftermath of the leadership race? Because I think those internal tensions I've been talking about are all going to come to the surface. So a Travis Taves may have strong support in rural Alberta, probably not in the cities. Doug Schweitzer may have support in the cities, but not in rural Alberta. And so I think if Kenney had survived, I think you'd have seen a much quicker splinter. In this case, I think a splinter is inevitable because they're incompatible. They're fundamentally incompatible, but I think they'll wait to see how the leadership race works itself out.
What does this do for Rachel Notley? Like, I've heard different scenarios of people speculation saying that this paves the way for a almost certain NDP win next spring, or the prospect of maybe somebody like Brian Jean, who becomes a leader, brings the party together, and then Alberta voters will vote for him in the spring because they're anti-NDP.
I think Rachel Notley is still in good position. They're still in a polling edge, but albeit that was against Jason Kenney, they still have a huge fundraising advantage, and they've been using that money in pre-election ads in the city of Calgary. People are saying, well, the old conservative playbook was to dump an unpopular leader and save the party. Don Getty goes down, Ralph Klein comes in, saves the party. Ralph Klein goes down, Ed Stelmach comes in. Ed Stelmach goes down, Alison Redford. And it worked until Jim Prentice. But I think those days of that dynasty are gone. And the challenge that any cabinet minister is going to have, is you were around the cabinet table over COVID. We didn't hear you speak up. What was your position? The same thing that Heather Stefanson is going through in Manitoba, saying you were at Pallister's cabinet table. We're tying you to Pallister. That's an edge that Brian Jean doesn't have. The danger that Jean has, though, is he has been playing footsies with some of the extremists, and Daniel Smith is gone, you know, ivermectin and all that other crazy COVID stuff. So, you know, that those are some of the issues that they've got. So I think Notley is still in strong shape. I would argue, and I have argued, the NDP is stronger today than when they formed government in 2015. They're more experienced, they're more seasoned, they've been able to recruit better people, they're having very competitive nomination battles. You know, Rachel Notley is the first premier in Alberta history to run again after losing. So I think the NDP is in good shape. But the electoral math against a unified Conservative Party is always going to be tough in a two-party system, but I don't think it'll be a two-party system.
Well, one of the things that, you know, since the creation of the UCP, I've run across many former, you know, PCs who felt that they were pushed out of the party. Some of them were quite senior, and they've been, you know, almost homeless since then. They didn't want to vote UCP, can't vote NDP, don't, you know, aren't thrilled with the Alberta Party. What role might those old PC, you know?
There's been so much speculation about those old PCers and why they've just disappeared. They didn't put up a fight when Jason Kenney took over the party. They, some of them have drifted to the Alberta Party, but they really haven't done much. I would also suggest there's old Wild Rosers that were upset with Kenney. When you look at the makeup of the Kenney cabinet, with the exception of Rick McIver, there was no one who was a legacy Wild Rose or a legacy PCer. It was like Kenney wanted people personally loyal to him and to the new party. The difference is some of those old Wild Rosers did win. The Todd Lowens, the Dave Hansons, the Drew Barnes, and they were punted out of cabinet, and they've shown that they can win. But the PCs, they don't have that sort of organizational structure anymore. They just, for a party that was in power for 44 years, they just seem to give up so quickly.
Gotcha. Well, Duane, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
Okay, keep tuned because the story continues.